Happy Sunday, everyone. 1 week to go till Christmas. Hope you're all having a good time. Gonna have some time off with the family. Our family's gonna be heading to Hawaii for Christmas, which we've never done before. And Christmas falls on a Sunday, so we'll see how the musing ends up next week. Maybe we'll keep it brief. We'll follow the church's pattern they seem to do, right? Like canceling the second hour of church and only doing sacrament meeting on Christmas. Today, I have a topic that I've been thinking about for some time. I've talked about it a little bit here and there in past musings, but this idea in particular came more to the forefront of my mind as a result of something I was learning about a few days ago. So I am in a coaching program called Strategic Coach for entrepreneurs and the like. And earlier this week, I was in Los Angeles and at the training. It's a quarterly thing. So I was in Santa Monica, and they were introducing some of their tools and thinking tools and various things that they do to kind of help people organize their lives and commit to better and bigger action and the rest. They introduced this concept that they called the 4 C's, this kind of cycle of impact or entrepreneurship that really resonated with me. And so I'm going to share that briefly and then talk about its gospel application. Fundamentally, this tool, this system is about helping us be bigger and better versions of ourselves. So if we set aside the gospel context or application for just a minute, because again, they were teaching this to entrepreneurs for business, the first thing entails a commitment. So you're striving for a big goal. You want to accomplish this great thing. You have to fully commit to it. If you're half-hearted, if you're not fully committed, if it's a maybe, right? Your mind is not going to align itself in such a way to, motivate you and push you forward. So commitment is key, right? We have to say, I want that big thing. I want to, speak on a stage for the first time ever if you've never done that. Or I want to write a book, or I want to become a teacher, or, whatever it is for you, there's a commitment that comes first. Once you've made that commitment, then the next C is courage, because when you're committing to something bigger or different than you've ever done before, well, of course, you don't know how to do that. Otherwise, it wouldn't really require a commitment. You would already know how to do something. So you need a bit of courage. You need to risk reputation. You need to acknowledge that I have no idea how to do this, but I'm nevertheless committed to figuring it out. And because of that commitment, you have the ability to work through the challenge, have courage, and figure it out along the way. Seek help from various people or resources, but marshal together whatever you have at your disposal in order to fulfill that commitment that you're fully committed to. So the commitment leads to courage. And then as a result of that process of courage and figuring it out despite not knowing how to achieve the commitment, then you develop a capability, right? So again, like let's say you've never spoken on a stage, it terrifies you, but you commit to doing it at this one event. I'm gonna have courage. I'm gonna figure it out. I'm gonna learn, watch some YouTube videos from professional speakers. I'm gonna practice in front of the mirror. I'm going to do all these things I've never done before. I'm going to have courage about this. And then you go up and you do it on stage, and now you find, oh, that wasn't so bad after all. Or look at all these things I've learned. I've acquired a new skill. I have a new capability. So that's the third C. We get the capability. And then the final and fourth C is confidence. Because you have that new capability, you have confidence in yourself, in your own abilities, in the impact that you can have. Now, of course, because you have more confidence than you did before, that cycle repeats. And so you can set a new commitment, right? You can think bigger and bolder. So to run with my example from before, if you spoke on stage for the first time in your life and now you have a new capability and you feel confident that, hey, that wasn't so bad, I can do this after all. Maybe it's, hey, I should do that again, or hey, I should do that a few more times, or hey, I should, go take a professional speaking course and whatever, right? So the goals, the impact becomes bigger and bigger. It becomes a virtuous cycle in which, our impact continues to increase, and that leads to even greater and greater and greater things, like the proverbial snowball rolling down the hill. So maybe you can see where I'm going with this, but the idea is, what does that mean in the gospel context? What does God say about our own virtuous cycle of impact? This idea of committing to something, having courage about it, and then developing a new capability for which we have confidence to then set an even greater commitment. To me, this is a thinking tool, a process that's very compatible with the gospel. And so as I learned this tool as they've presented it, these 4 C's, and as I've been reflecting on this over the weekend, I've been searching the scriptures to kind of see what God has to say about these types of, like, the contrast between the scarcity mentality and the abundant mentality. And one of the concerns that I have, and this won't be any surprise to the longtime listeners, is that I think in our church culture, we have a lot of slothful servants. I'm going to share a particular scriptural example in a bit that was new to me in being related to this issue of slothful servants. I typically point to D&C 58, right? That we should do many things. We should be anxiously engaged in a good cause, trying to bring to pass much righteousness, and that if we wait to be commanded in all things or told what to do, then we're damned and we're a slothful servant. So that, in my mind, is where that term typically comes from. It's where I typically reference it, but I stumbled across, not even really looking for it, but happened upon a scripture that I'll share where I was like, oh, there's another connection to what it means to be a slothful servant. But generally speaking, I think we as a church culture have fallen into this trap of being scarcity-minded and of not having an abundance mentality. And so I see this virtuous cycle, these 4 C's, as leading us to greater abundance. Not of material possessions per se. Of course, in the entrepreneurial context, maybe that's a big focus, is earning more money or selling more things or acquiring more stuff. But even that process alone is not so much about the acquisition of material property. It's more about your own abilities, right? I am committed to doing something I've never done before. I'm going to have courage. I'm going to work through my own insecurities or worries or fears. And so I'm going to develop a new capability and have confidence in myself. None of that necessarily has anything to do with material possessions. It's about me. And that's why I feel like so much of this is congruent with the gospel. Why? Well, let's start with scarcity mentality. I think it's fair to compare scarcity mentality to fear. I think a lot of times people in our faith think that perhaps they're of limited worth. Perhaps when we look at the Molly Mormons around us or the general authorities or, all the things that are expected of us that we fail to do, going to the temple all the time and doing our family history and, preparing and ministering and all the things, like, we can oftentimes, I think, narrow our vision and view of our own worth because we butt up against this checklist gospel that, while its purpose is good, we should be doing all the things, and right? But it's like God, right? Be therefore perfect. Like, yes, there's a high bar of what we should be doing, but when we fall short, it doesn't mean that we're, awful people. But I do feel like there's this element in our culture where people can perceive that they are of limited worth. I think another scarcity mentality or mindset is obedience out of fear of punishment. Right? When we're worried about going to outer darkness or not making it to the celestial kingdom or not, having an eternal family or, burning up at the second coming or obeying because I don't want the bishop to find out or, whatever it is, when there's an obedience because, or, I'm going to do my ministering because I don't want the elders quorum or relief society president to, harass me or think poorly of me. I think those motivations based in fear are a scarcity mentality as well. I think another one is having a narrow range of future options in life. I think we don't dream big enough. I myself am guilty of this. In a business context, I was at another coaching program a few months ago, and I was talking to this guy who knows all these, billionaires and hangs out with all these crazy people. And I was sharing with him what I do. And he was, impressed and really excited to talk to me. And I was telling him about my impact and what our team has been able to do. And he's like, Connor, your opportunity is here, and you guys are playing small ball down here. You got to think bigger. You got to go quicker. You got to do more. And I was like, oh, wow. Like his invitation or challenge for me to think bigger when I already felt like I was doing fine or thinking big or whatever, it was kind of smack upside the head to realize maybe I am playing small ball. Maybe my own potential is far greater than I think it is because I don't feel deserving of it, or I feel insecure about how to get it. I don't know how to do that. I've never done it before. And so I kind of clam up, or I worry, or I just don't know. And so that can lead me to limit my future options if I'm not thinking big and bold enough, if I'm not exploring the greater impact that can be mine, if I kind of open my mind to and even commit to that bigger vision. So I think that applies to a lot of us, that we narrow the future options in our own life. We're not thinking about this massive potential. We're content with mediocrity. Was it last week or the week before I talked all about theological mediocrity? And we're content with it. It's the traditions of our fathers. It's the way things have always been. It's what I'm used to, the status quo. We're fine with the milk of the gospel. And so we don't work for the meat. We narrow the range of our future options in life. I think another thing that we can be guilty of in the gospel is trying to earn our salvation through works. I think that is a scarcity mentality as well. Perceiving that, God's gifts and blessings and eternal rest are reserved for those who are, following the hustle culture and the church and the gospel checklists and everything else. We're trying to earn our salvation. We're seeing that there's a narrow range, like a fixed pie of blessings, and if we want them, we got to work hard for them, rather than thinking that we're just implicitly deserving of them. Another one that I thought of this morning was another kind of scarcity mindset for us as saints that we struggle with, is one that I think we're very quick to critique others for, but less so ourselves. This isn't quite related. I'll get back to that in gospel doctrine today. Last day of the Old Testament, reading in Malachi, and one of the questions asked was something like, how are we not, I don't quite remember the question. It was something like, how are we not envisioning something more? How are we not because God was, through Malachi, criticizing the priests who had become corrupt, and they were, that's what it was, offerings. They had given these offerings that were, blind or lame, these animals that were not, perfect. They weren't following the law of Moses. And so Malachi is criticizing the corrupt priests for not giving the proper offering. And so I had made a comment a little earlier in the class where we're so quick to criticize the Israelites for being these idiots, worshiping calves and being morons. And we can't learn from people that we consider like that. We don't understand, or we can't draw from their experience anything that relates to us, because we're literally sitting in church. We're members of the one true church, right? We're followers of Christ. We can't relate to those people who abandoned God, who rejected God, as several people in my class said. They kept saying, reject God, reject God. And I had raised my hand to say, I don't think that's quite the way that they perceived it. I do think that God felt like they were rejecting him. But I feel like the Israelites, through all their travails and idolatry and everything else, I don't think that they saw themselves as rejecting God. They simply had polluted their faith with these kind of apostatized, neighborly religions and practices and beliefs and attitudes, but it was incremental. So often they were adopting practices that were inconsistent with God's faith, and yet they felt faithful in a lot of cases. So then the question that I guess that prompted was, well, how do we make sure that we're giving a good offering? How do we make sure that we're offering as much as we should? And so then that made me think, well, what is the answer to that? How are we not offering enough as Latter-day Saints? This kind of status quo, milky kind of gospel. So one idea that I thought of is how, again, just like we treat the Israelites as these, oh, you silly people, and we're so much better and smarter than you, right? I think the same thing happens with 2 Nephi 29:6. So this is where we have Nephi talking about the impact of what we now call the Book of Mormon, this additional record, and how it would basically confirm the Bible. It would be an additional witness, and out of the mouth of two, or three witnesses shall all truth be established. And so Nephi is saying this is an additional witness. And then he says in verse 6, thou fool that shall say, a Bible, we've got a Bible, and we need no more Bible, right? And I remember as a missionary using scriptures like this to push back against those who said literally that, right? Oh, we have a Bible already. Why do we need more? There's nothing more than that. We have the Bible. And so we would share this example. And to me, this is a very interesting set of verses, continuing from verse 6, because I think it illustrates this contrast between scarcity and abundance. So the scarce approach is we don't need more. We already have enough. We're fine. Don't rock the boat, right? Because getting more revelation just would require me to have more things to do and know and comply with. So I don't want more. I have this resistance, not me. Well, I'm sure me in some cases, but I'm speaking generally. The people will have this resistance to additional light and knowledge because of the obligations that are attendant with it. But then we continue in verse 7. Know ye not that there are more nations than one, right? So now we're thinking abundance. It's not just about you. There's so much more. I've created all men. I remember those who are on the isles of the sea and all these people. Wherefore murmur ye? Why are you murmuring? Because that you will receive more of my word. Why are you complaining? This is verse 8. Because you're going to get more revelation. Scarcity mindset, right? I have enough. I don't need more. I want to think small. I do this so that I can prove that I'm the same yesterday, today, tomorrow. And because that I've spoken one word, you need not suppose that I can't speak another, abundance. My work is not yet finished. Wherefore, because you have a Bible, you need not suppose that it contains all my words. Neither should you suppose that I haven't caused more to be written. Again, like these people who reject the Book of Mormon because, I got the Bible, that's enough, don't realize what they're missing out on, and they're basically trying to limit God. They're being scarcity-minded to a God of abundance. And so I bring that example up because I feel like we have the same problem in the church. I talked a few months ago all about the sealed portion of the Book of Mormon and how we're all under condemnation for treating lightly the things that we've received, for not remembering the new and everlasting covenant, the Book of Mormon, not just to say, but to do according to that which is written. That's from D&C 84. And so I feel like we fall into the same trap. We think ourselves so enlightened as Latter-day Saints for having the Book of Mormon and the Doctrine and Covenants and all these additional revelations. And yet we fall into many of the same traps that the Israelites did, that, the Gentiles have with the Book of Mormon that Nephi is talking about. We have the same problem when it comes to trying to obtain additional revelation. We become content with the status quo. We don't want more, because if we did, we would be striving for it, and we're not as a church. We don't even talk about it, which was the point I made in the other musing. So that's another example of scarcity mentality. Fear of the unknown, fear of the obligation, right? That comes, fear of the uncertainty about a bigger future, fear of our own inadequacies and looking stupid, fear of not deserving of God's blessings, fear of punishment, and so we obey, right? It's all fear. Scarcity mentality, fear. So by contrast, an abundance mentality, I feel like, is faith. Earning our salvation through faith, relying on God's mercy for his just, bounteous blessings, having faith that we qualify, having faith that our offering is good enough, having faith that God has more in store for us than we can ever imagine, that we can love others more fully, that we can obey out of love, right? Not out of punishment, but out of this kind of feeling of abundance, of God's greatness and glory. faith in obtaining more revelation and more scriptures, having faith in our own capability, that our capabilities will increase as our commitment increases. Remember, we commit and we have courage, and so we develop new capabilities, which gives us confidence so that we can commit to even more and greater things. So we know already, it's very clear that there's this contrast, this duality between faith and fear. And we know that this fear-based approach is incompatible with the gospel, that we're called to have faith. We're called to abundance, and yet we become so often trapped in scarcity. And we have this limited view, and we're bound down by the traditions of our fathers, and we remain asleep with the dust falling on us, right? Where the scriptures always say, arise and shake off the dust and all these things. So what's interesting to me, having thought about this over the weekend, I went looking for various scriptures that had to do with this, and I was surprised at how much this concept of abundance was discussed. Abraham 4, as an example, the gods prepared the water that they might bring forth great whales and every living creature that moveth, which the waters were to bring forth abundantly after their kind. Relatedly in D&C 104, where it talks about how God has prepared this world for us and that there's enough and to spare, right? This idea of abundance, where everyone else out in the world has this fear-based, scarcity-minded approach. Peak oil, peak agriculture, peak this, peak that, global warming, overpopulation, we're going to run out, there's not going to be enough, right? And God doesn't operate that way. That's all based in fear and scarcity, looking at a fixed pie. God grows the pie. God gives new technology. God gives new innovation. God gives new inspiration to doing things bigger, better, bolder, differently than we thought of before. And so that fear-based scarcity mindset traps us in inadequacy and mediocrity, when God is saying there's enough and to spare. Like, you're going to be okay, right? I've created an abundant world. I'm going to skip this next scripture because I want to spend more time with it. So I'll come back to this. D&C 59:16. Inasmuch as you show gratitude, the fullness of the earth is yours. The beasts of the field, the fowls of the air, all things which come of the earth are made for the benefit and use of man. It pleases God that he's given all these things unto man, for unto this end were they made to be used. Right? All these things, all these possessions, these assets, these provisions, the fullness of the earth is ours. Just that to me says so much of abundance. 2 Nephi 4, I know that God will give liberally to him that asketh. D&C 93, if you keep my commandments, you shall receive of his fullness and be glorified in me. Behold, this is interesting. Here's the agency of man, and here is the condemnation of man. Because that which was from the beginning is plainly manifest unto them, and they receive not the light. They're willing to not aspire for abundance, right? And they become condemned, just like we all are, because like with the sealed portion of the Book of Mormon and the existing records, we've treated these things lightly. We are condemned as a people. This condemnation resteth upon all, is what it says, and it's never been lifted. And so he's saying, here's your agency and your condemnation. I plainly manifest these things, I teach you these things, and you receive not the light. You don't want more. Joseph Smith talked about how he'd try to introduce these ideas and doctrines, and the saints would fly like pieces of glass and be shattered because they were so clinging to the traditions of their fathers. Okay, let's go back and talk about that other verse. So John 10:10. The thief cometh not, but for to steal and to kill and to destroy. I am come that they might have life, and that they might have it more abundantly. I love that verse. The thief, the devil, the adversary, whatever you want to call him, right? He comes to steal and kill and destroy. It's like secret combinations. It's just power and gain and tearing others down and massive scarcity mentality, right? Trying to hoard possessions and steal from others and acquire supposedly finite resources. So fear, scarcity mentality. By contrast, God comes that we might have life and that we might have it more abundantly. I think that scripture is just so rich with meaning. I've come that they might have life and that they might have it more abundantly. This so much of the gospel, I feel like, is like, endure to the end, right? Like, here's all these checklists and here's everything you're supposed to know and do and all the things, and, and suffer for years and struggle under the weight of obligation and endure as a Latter-day Saint to the end. And that's kind of the mentality that I feel like I had growing up in the church, was this, looking at the early saints and the suffering and the challenging and the glory in suffering. I think Paul talks about, right? Where he welcomes that opportunity to basically be a martyr, to suffer for the gospel. And while that has its place, and frankly, we could probably use a little bit more of that, I think becomes a big problem when we become praised by the world because we become fat and happy and lazy. I think it has its place, but I think there's got to be moderation and balance, because otherwise we see the gospel as just this inherently arduous thing that has to be endured. Whereas Jesus said, my yoke is easy and my burden light. And there's an incongruence there that has to be reconciled. I've come that they might have life and that they might have it more abundantly. That to me, like, I've just been processing that. God wants so much more for us than we're allowing ourselves to envision. All right, Luke 12. This is one of God's parables that I think relates to this issue. And then I'm going to share that other scripture I mentioned about being a slothful servant. So this is Luke 12. There's someone in the group that said, Master, speak to my brother that he'll divide our inheritance with me. Jesus said, who made me a judge or divider over you? And he said unto them, take heed and beware of covetousness, for a man's life does not consist in the abundance of things which he possesses. Did I'm using in the past how I'm over all this King James Shakespearean stuff. So then these verses go on talking about how this guy had all these assets, and so he built big barns to hoard them all and possess them all. And so then in the parable, the guy dies, and then God is like, well, what good did that do you? Right? You built a big barn for all this stuff, and what good did that do you? But God said unto him, thou fool, this night thy soul shall be required of thee. Then whose shall those things be which thou hast provided? So is he that lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. That's interesting. If you're laying up treasure for yourself, you're not, quote unquote, rich toward God. This, in my mind, this abundance, I think the problem we run into is when people corrupt this into a prosperity gospel, right? In which the purpose or priority or benefit of our faithfulness is to have material prosperity. And so you get in a lot of these various evangelical churches that fall into this trap, this emphasis, this focus, right? But by contrast here, it's not about laying up treasures for yourself. It's about being rich toward God. It's an interesting idea. Now, abundance, I think, does include material possessions. And I do think there's an element where those, and I'll talk about this in a minute, where those who wisely use their resources in furtherance of building God's kingdom and as he would want these resources used is going to be entrusted with more. I think we can attain and aspire even for abundance of material possessions, but where your heart is, there is your treasure also. So it's this very cautious and careful thing where it can't be the focus, it can't be the priority. It's got to be about the impact. It's got to be about the benefit to others, what you're doing, not just what you're hoarding, like this guy in a barn with all these resources that he wanted to cling to. Okay, now we go to Matthew 25, the parable of the talents. And you know this, so I'm just going to summarize it. This is Matthew 25. He gives, in the parable, the master gives 5 talents to someone, 2 talents to someone, and then 1 talent to someone else. To every man according to his ability, which I also find interesting, getting back to that capability idea. And so the person who had 5 went out and leveraged it and was able to develop 5 more. And so his Lord said unto him, this is verse 21, well done, thou good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a few things. I will make thee ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of the Lord. So this acknowledgement of and blessing of growth, pursuing abundance, and you became a little abundant. You were pursuing greater things. I'm going to give you even greater things on top of that. He's a good and faithful servant. Again, that contrast between faith and fear. That the abundance mentality is faith, the scarcity mentality is fear. So the process repeats for the servant with 2 talents. He is also called a good and faithful servant. And then we come to the one who had 1 talent. And he said, Lord, I knew that you're a hard man, reaping where you haven't sown and gathering where you haven't strawed. And I was afraid, fear. He's not a faithful servant. He's a fearful servant. And I was afraid and went and hid your talent in the earth. There thou hast, that is thine. There thou hast, that is thine. Ugh, King James. His Lord said unto him, thou wicked and slothful servant. You knew that I reap where I don't sow and gather where I don't straw. You should have put your money to the exchangers, and then I would have got some usury, blah, blah, blah. This is verse 29. For unto everyone that has shall be given, and he shall have abundance. But from him that does not have shall be taken away even what he does have. It was so interesting for me to read this. I read this at the very end of my study and scripture searching and reflection and everything, because I had accumulated all these other verses, some of which I haven't even shared. And then I knew, of course, about this parable, but then I went back and read the whole thing. It had been a little while since I read the whole thing. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is the exact pattern. It's the contrast of faith versus fear. And it's the contrast of abundance versus a scarcity mentality. Literally saying that whoever develops more, whoever's pursuing it, will have abundance. And that those who have this scarcity mindset, this fear-based approach, they're going to be removed of what they have, what little they have. They're slothful servants, right? So again, D&C 58, be anxiously engaged in the good cause, bringing to pass much righteousness. If you're waiting to be commanded in all things or told what to do, it says we are a slothful servant and condemned. And then here, in the parable of the talents, the individual who buried his talent, who did not follow that virtuous cycle of committing to growth, having courage, right? Developing a new capability, and then being confident in that new ability so that you can then make an even bigger, greater commitment, which is effectively what the other servants were doing with their 5 and their 2 talents. At least, I'm inferring into the parable that they're following a similar cycle by leveraging and developing the talents that they had. By contrast, the servant who buried his talent, right? He was not committing to growth. He didn't have courage, quite the opposite. Therefore, he did not pursue or attain any new capabilities, and therefore lacks confidence in himself. And so he's condemned, he's damned. His progress is impeded, which is what all that means, right? So he can't progress until he commits to that cycle. He has to commit, right? To follow the commandments, to, develop his talents, whatever you want to say. He has to commit. He has to have courage, faith, develop that new capability, right? With gifts of the Spirit, Holy Ghost helping you, God blessing you, trying through your own sheer force and determination, develop the new capability, and then you have confidence in yourself and in God's blessings and guidance so that you can then go commit to more. So again, to me, this is like hand in glove. This abundance mentality in the gospel is really all about faith and commitment and growth. And he literally says here, whoever has, you'll be given more, and you will have abundance. It's just so interesting to read this chapter and then see all these little things in here, that fits. He's a slothful servant versus being a faithful servant. Here's he's fearful. Anyways, it was really interesting. I got a lot of quotes here that I pulled from church leaders too. I like this one. I'm not going to go through all these. Lorenzo Snow, the Lord has not given us the gospel so that we go around mourning all the days of our lives. Again, this endure to the end concept. Joseph Worthen, I liked this one. Too many people sit at the banquet table of the gospel of Jesus Christ and merely nibble at the feast placed before them. They go through the motions, attending their meetings perhaps, glancing at scriptures, repeating family prayers, or familiar prayers, repeating familiar prayers, but their hearts are far away. If they're honest, they would admit to being more interested in the latest neighborhood rumors, stock market trends, and their favorite TV show than they are in the supernal wonders and sweet ministerings of the Holy Spirit. So, of course, this reminded me of D&C 1, the whole basis for the restoration. God is saying that we, in this day, it says, for they have strayed from mine ordinances and have broken my everlasting covenant. They seek not the Lord to establish his righteousness, but every man walketh in his own way, after the image of his own God, whose image is in the likeness of the world, and whose substance is that of an idol, which waxes old and shall perish in Babylon. Right? So our hearts are far away. Elder Worthland is saying that we go through the motions. With our lips, we draw near unto God, but our hearts are far away from him. And I think that's the question for each of us, right? Where is our heart? Right? Where is our treasure? That's where our heart is. If our treasure is material possessions or social media or other people's opinions about us or our job or our social standing or blah, 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 right? If that's what we treasure, then that's where our heart is. And then our hearts are far away from God. And then every man is walking in his own way after the image of his own God. It's the whole reason why God restored the gospel. He says it in D&C 1, which was a revelation given later, by the way. It wasn't the first modern revelation. The Lord gave this as a revelation specifically for inclusion at the beginning of the Book of Commandments, what we now call the Doctrine and Covenants. And he's basically giving the pretext, the context for why we have the restoration. He's like, everyone's wandering around doing their own thing, right? That's why I called Joseph. That's why I gave unto them revelations. That's why these commandments exist. And then here we are today, the Latter-day Saints, almost 200 years later, and we're falling into the same traps as the Israelites and their idolatry and the early saints and their condemnation for treating lightly the things that they had received. We're becoming slothful. We're scarcity-minded. We are not thinking about and pursuing abundance. We are not having sufficient faith to pursue great things. Whether that's, the sealed portion of the Book of Mormon, making your calling and election sure, having constant companionship of the Holy Ghost, like whatever it is, the question for you and I is, what are we committing to now? What are we striving for? Are we content with mediocrity? Are we content with the status quo? The traditions of our fathers are pretty fun. We're familiar with them. We've grown up around them for a long time. They're comfortable, right? Just like the people who say, oh, we have a Bible, we don't need more of a Bible. They're comfortable in what they have because having more means they're having to change things, and no one likes change, including you and I. We as humans resist it, and so we don't actively often pursue new things that are going to force us to change. But that is the entire purpose of that 4C cycle. I'll end here. What was very interesting to me in learning about these 4 C's in this little format that they said, is they were talking about how entrepreneurs are different than most people in various ways, but primarily in the fact that they will actively seek out pain. The point was that entrepreneurs voluntarily set these massive commitments of things they have no clue how to do that impels them to be courageous and figure it out, to develop massively new capabilities. Whereas other people, non-entrepreneurial type people, don't necessarily have this mindset. They don't voluntarily seek pain. They might prefer the 9 to 5. They prefer the comfort. They wait to be told what to do by their boss. They don't want to have to do the scary thinking. They want the steady paycheck. And so I'm not here to knock people who work, 9 to 5 at all. I employ many of them. And, of course, we're always trying to have our team and other people think entrepreneurially. This isn't just like, if you're a business owner, this applies to you and no one else. It's not meant to be an exclusive thing, but it's a contrast of how we behave. Do we voluntarily seek out bigger, bolder things that make us nervous? Or do we only do that when external circumstances, a boss or market conditions or a competitor impose upon us that need to go be courageous and pursue a different commitment. So their point was entrepreneurs, in the absence of any external threat from the market, from a competitor, from investors or anything else, entrepreneurs will voluntarily go pursue these big commitments that bring pain, fear, right? So they have to then be courageous and go figure it out. I end there because I wonder where we are at in our church. Are we voluntarily seeking for and committing for greater things, right? All the time in the scriptures, God is saying, seek, 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 seek after this. Ask and it will be given unto you. Knock and it shall be opened. Like that is such an invitation to an abundance, right? That like, I can't even fathom that. The Lord comes that he might give us life and that we might have it more abundantly. Ask and it shall be given you. I know that there's all these corrupt worldly philosophies and just like ask the universe and it will happen. And like, I don't really go down that path, but I do think that those are, we might call them counterfeits or substitutes for God doing the very same thing. Just ask me and I'll give it to you, right? Ask in faith. And we can so often have what we want. We just got to ask for it and set these big commitments and then pursue it. And it's such a gospel of abundance that even myself growing up with, I think, a much more scarcity mindset, I've had to like deprogram myself, or I find it very difficult to like pause and be like, well, no, like I can do so much more than that. Or why am I limiting myself here? Or why am I asking God for these small little things? I want, something bigger. How do I do that? How do I voluntarily inflict upon myself the pain of being here when I want to be here, and what all do I need to change? Because as an entrepreneur, it's the same thing. It's like, I have no idea how to reach that goal. I got to change all these things in my business and in my personal life or in my approach. Forces me to change what I do and how I think and how I act, and then gather the resources and people and others who can help me attain that goal. I think it's the same thing with the gospel. When we have this big commitment, when we voluntarily pursue these big things, we're going to have to change. Are you and I the type where we are willing and even eager to voluntarily seek that discomfort, knowing that it's going to require us to be courageous so that we can go develop new capabilities and then have more confidence in ourselves and God? There's a lot here for me. I mean, maybe you've sensed that, like I've said it a couple times, just even some of these scriptures, I've been trying to like reflect and ponder like how this actually works, what this actually means, that we can have, life more abundantly. What does it mean to be rich toward God? What is it? Am I deluded in thinking that, the acquisition of material wealth, while just a facet of overall abundance, is okay to the extent that we're using it as an instrument in God's hands and to make an impact and help other people? Like is abundance limited? And how can we make sure that as we pursue abundance, we don't fall into that trap of ungratitude, the trap of pride, of thinking, oh, I did that, I built that. Just there's so many like little rabbit holes to go down on this topic. But John 10:10 is where I want to leave it. Again, I am come that they might have life and that they might have it more abundantly. I think that's something good for us to ponder, especially as we head into Christmas, thinking both about Jesus, but then also trading gifts and, having all this new crap in our house from Amazon. What does it mean to pursue abundance? I think this has to do with ourselves, our investment in our own capabilities, our spiritual gifts, our capacity for impact, being an instrument in God's hands. Are we sharpening ourselves? Are we, trying to improve as that instrument? Are we voluntarily seeking for that improvement? Or are we being slothful servants and waiting to be commanded, waiting to be told what to do? Interesting thoughts to consider. I'm going to wrap it there. See you guys next week on Christmas for what surely will be a very brief and short Sunday musing. Hope you guys all have a Merry Christmas. Thanks for listening. Thanks for sharing. Really appreciate it. It's almost been a year. I think I got couple more episodes and then we'll have done this every week for a year. No plans to stop. I just posted on Facebook this morning asking for more ideas, even though I've got a long list of my own and lots of folks there suggesting more ideas. So I got plenty to muse about. Thanks for listening. Thanks for sharing, and have a Merry Christmas. Talk to you soon.